Hello, everybody. This is our next episode of Surpassed webinars. Today we have a really interesting person, really special person when it comes to the semantic search, a really big name in the semantic search. And his name is David Amarwant. Before that, I would like to say that my name is Dido Grigorov. I'm head of SEO, head of content department at Serpact. And this is my colleague, Boris Fafarapchis. He is the SEO strategist at Serpact. So, Bobby?
Hi guys, I'm Boris from Serpact. As I am a SEO strategist at the company, I have also 16 years experience in local SEO strategies, distribution of content, and many other things. Let's make some brief introduction to our guest today and give him the word.
Mm-hmm.
David Amarwant helps many multinational clients and startups to organize their sale in social media strategies. He is a business journalist, author, and speaker. He blogs about social media, search engine optimization, writes from a number of websites, including Forbes and many other names and corporations. So we have a very solid guest that we respect a lot. Hi, David. How are
Hello,
you?
and I'm good. I'm so pleased to be here. This is an exciting forum, so hopefully we'll get some really interesting questions.
Yeah.
David, so we have some common questions for our guests always at the beginning of the webinars. And the first question is, tell us more about your background. So the audience actually knows about you because you were here at one of actually at the biggest conference for SEO here in 2015. But tell us more about your background. Why did you start with semantic search, and why semantic search? You also have a lot of books written and published. So tell us more about the books as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I'm a chemical engineer by training. My MSc was on quantum thermodynamics. And when I finished university, I went into writing for newspapers where I translated technical stuff into simple stuff for their audience, which kind of explains what I do most of the time. I take very complex things and I tend to translate them. If we talk about complexity and how it affects us in our daily lives, I think semantic search is probably one of the biggest things which has a greater impact in how economies work, how people actually get to find out things, and how businesses get to basically sort of market themselves on the web. And it has been one of my pet projects, if you like. One of the first books I published in 2010 was about SEO, from a very practical perspective, where we take very practical steps which are doable, and we don't focus too much on the complexity of the science. And I've been doing that ever since. And I write about other things which are tangential to this. I write about social media and marketing online, and then business branding. And then, of course, my last book was on decision making, which seems to be something different, but it isn't actually, because human behavior and how we operate in this world is very much part of search.
Okay. And something more about your books. Tell us more about the ideas behind the books, and if you can share some interesting facts around them.
Yeah, I mean, every book really is designed usually to answer a simple question. Okay, when I started writing about search, the question was, how do I make the best possible use of what I do in order to take advantage of search without being too technical? So everything which I do in those books, when I wrote Google Semantic Search, for instance, back in 2012 now, it was about that kind of approach. So essentially, you ask yourself, what is it you sort of need to do in order to take advantage of things without having to know about programming, or having to know about structured data too much, or having to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours understanding what it is you have to do. The same thing goes for when I wrote about social media. there's a huge amount of complexity in how social media works, because essentially we use mathematical formulas to guide how our digital personas connect, interconnect, and interact with each other. And this is really complex, right? So we take a mathematical representational model of the physical world, we put it online, and then we use those formulas to sort of guide it. But at the essence of it, it's us. It's our actions, our behavior. At the essence of search, as we will find out today, it's again us. It's our actions, our judgments, our intent, and our behavior. So everything I do is aimed really at simplifying this as much as possible. And I always take Einstein's dictum on this, that everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. So I make it as simple as possible without oversimplifying it. And the aim always is to give the reader something practical, which they can, sort of read about, and they go away and they say, okay, I'm going to try this, and I'll see the benefits, even though I don't understand the science behind it. And you don't really have to.
Yeah, we have read some of your books, and we're very happy with them because you have really achieved your goal to make the things simpler. We know all the stuff behind the machine learning today, classifications, regressions, the so-called structured and unstructured information that
Yes.
algorithms work, and this is kind of very difficult for persons in any kind not related to the development world. So you make this actually you shorten up the space between the developers and the real marketers, so marketers will understand exactly what these kind of machine learning models are doing. In this context, I would like to ask you one question: what is SEO for you today?
Well, search engine optimization in principle, right, has always been about the same thing. It's how do you bridge the gap between what you put on the web and what the person looking for it is actually looking for. And because of the complexity of the technology itself, and also because of its limitations, this has always been a big gap to bridge. And thankfully, as the technology becomes more complex and its limitations become fewer and fewer, the gap gets narrower and narrower. And this is where it gets really interesting. We think that, okay, and people have asked me this question before. They go to me, semantic search is here. We don't need to hire an SEO. And I always laugh at that, because as the technology gets more complex, as the gap between the content and the reader looking for it gets narrower, there are more variables that need to be taken into account, which now come under the banner of psychology, I would say, and under the banner of behaviorism. So although a lot of my writing is intended to simplify things for the average reader, and it tells them, this is what you need, at the same time, it's not a replacement for a professional. And I always stress that. So if you're going, for instance, to hire an SEO company to create content for you, or to optimize your website, or to optimize your social media presence, it helps you to understand what it is that they actually do. So you don't constantly have to question yourself, am I getting my money's worth? The answer usually is yes, because they're professionals. They do all the complex studying, all the complex research that bridges what you want to achieve with the audience which you're targeting. And that is something which a lot of the times isn't clearly understood, but it must be stressed again and again. It's like cars, for instance. If we go back to, I remember in the 70s when I was growing up, my friends had their cars in the backyard all taken apart, right? All the engines and engine parts, and they were doing them themselves. Okay, you get a modern car today, and the one little piece that you need to remove needs something very specific. It needs a specific key, or needs a specific screwdriver, or it needs, a little computer component that will actually talk to it. And that little thing which you need requires expertise to use, and it's really expensive to acquire. So, that's why you take your car to a car dealership to do it for you, right? You don't do it yourself anymore.
Yeah, really great explanation. Thank you. I have another one interesting question. We are all in the era of global. Recently, Don Anderson, our colleague, and she's a really renowned SEO specialist. She has written one of the biggest machine learning article around the world right now on search engine land, and she talks about ranking in Google Bot.
Yes.
But we are also in the era of two-stage ranking of documents. You know about this technology already because we were in the era of information retrieval only, where the ranked documents were not so good when it comes to intent and relevance. But now we
Yes.
have way better relevancy and way better intent. So how do you think Google Boards impacts SEO today? And why
Okay.
do you see it in the future?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is really amazing because essentially what's happening, a lot of the programming of search now is going into what we call a black box territory. We use machine learning where the algorithms themselves have been trained on massive amounts of data, but then the inferences they draw from that data are not transparent anymore. And the only way we have of assessing that is cumulatively their success rate. So if, for instance, Google tomorrow rolls out an update and they say, this update is about quality, and the update is designed to help quality pages surface. This is what they are planning to do. But what they may end up doing may be the opposite. But they will only find that out after we get cumulative results and everybody starts yelling that their page is not there and they've dropped off, and we see that, and Google goes back and fixes it. So essentially, what we are going to continue to see are incremental and constant improvements in search. This hasn't changed from the first day we implemented search. And those incremental improvements are going to be more and more complicated, more and more complex, and they will try to address the really difficult aspect of reading human behavior. Now, it has to be said at this point that essentially search has always been about human behavior. I know as SEOs, we've talked about algorithms and updates and quality updates and links and all this, and we try to bring everything together. But at the end of the day, if we simplify this to its most basic things, what is it? What do search engines try to do? They try to understand what do the majority of people want and give it to them. And usually, if you have a web page, what do you try to do? You try to say, okay, this is what my web page is about. I want it to be as clearly understood by those people who are most likely to become my customers. So we need to sort of achieve that clarity. And that's where all these things are pointing towards. And there's going to be a segment or a time zone of relative confusion as webmasters and web owners try to sort of create the kind of content that they will think they will attract people, and it may not do that. And search engines themselves begin to learn, and we're talking about predominantly about Google, but also Bing does the same thing, and all the other semantic search engines use the same kind of technology. They try to understand human intent and human emotion sometimes by reading behavioral signals on the web. And this is always an imperfect science at the moment because we don't quite know enough yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's connected to our main topic. David, let's go to it.
Okay.
Let's define for our audience what is exactly the intent and why do we have to understand it, why it's important.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
we actually decided to ask this question because we still see that there are people not really understanding the intent behind the
That's
results
correct.
in search.
Yeah. Okay, let's backtrack a little bit and ask the basic question. What is it that makes a business successful? And the formula for that is very simple. A business is successful if it continually finds new customers and it retains the customers it has found. And if you do those two things, that's it. Bingo, success. We know it doesn't happen, and then we have to ask ourselves why. And usually the reason why is because what the business does on the online world at the moment, because if we take this on offline, we constantly adjust our behavior to satisfy our customers. But that's because we constantly read the signals. So if you're in the street corner, for instance, selling, I don't know, hot dogs, somebody comes up and he says, do you have relish? And you know they want a hot dog with relish. So if you have relish, you'll try to give them that. You say, I have hot relish and medium relish. If I have hot mustard and medium mustard, depending on what they want. When they come online, there's no such interaction in real time. So you have to hope that your content asynchronously, that the system you have set up actually does that on a blind basis. And this is, in order for that to happen, what do you have to do? The almost impossible thing. You have to imagine all the possible intentions of somebody coming to your website and trying then to cater to all those possible events. And it becomes really difficult and really complex. So essentially, we try to understand intent through behavior. We need to understand that intent itself is an internal state in how we feel. Behavior is an external state in what we actually see. So behavior is data. We can capture it. We can see how a person performs or behaves on a website. We can see where they go. We can see what they do next. We can see when they abandon something. Now, from that, we begin then the process of translating for ourselves their internal state. So if somebody abandons a page, what are the options? The options are that they're unsatisfied, that they came there by mistake, that this is not what they're looking for, that perhaps the item is too expensive, perhaps the service is not trustworthy enough because there's something on the page which makes them consider that, maybe I don't want to take the risk of carrying out a transaction, or they may simply left it and come back at a later date. So all those things are in play. And what we need to try and do is understand this as much as possible and create the funnel that leads to the right kind of transactional outcome, which for us is usually a conversion of some kind. Somebody reads an article, buys a product, sends us a message or whatever it is that we want to do. And this is where it gets really interesting, because everybody asks, okay, how do you know what people want? And I have an answer to this, but I think we've got a couple more questions before we get to that.
Very well explained, David. Thank you. And also, I think it's connected to chatbot scenarios or even Google Assistant or something like this. You ask, do you want ice cream? What kind of ice cream? Vanilla or chocolate with cherries or blackberries? So much scenarios, and also that you say so much things we have to consider.
That's right. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, in a chatbot situation, we usually have a decision tree, which is quite linear, right? It gives us all these choices and takes us all down these paths. This indicates both the power of a chatbot, but also the limitations, because the moment you get outside the decision tree, the connection between the person and the chatbot breaks, because the chatbot simply can't respond. So then you see the response is wrong, the wrong response puts you off, you don't want to continue the conversation, and there's a lost thing. That also, in many ways, typifies the problem with the web today. We have search engines which are quite sensitive to information. They're even beginning now to index specific passages of content that exist on specific web pages, which can become an answer to a search query. So we're getting quite granular, quite deep. At the same time, there are still limitations to this, because when we create that content, sometimes our own understanding of what is required is limited. It's bounded. And it's bounded because of human nature, because when we create that content, what do we focus on? On our own intention, on our own internal state, which then we externalize through the creation of content. So for instance, let's say I want to make sales, and I think, what do I need to make sales? I need a lot of people who are targeted relevant traffic. My idea of relevant traffic may be different to the idea of the people who actually search for that. And then if I also focus on a lot of people, what I do automatically, as I'm creating the content, I begin to broaden the aspect, thinking I'm creating quite a wide funnel here. I'm going to get them all in there, and I'm going to get a percentage conversion. And this is wrong thinking. We have to, again, when semantic search came along, it turned us all into photographers, publishers, and writers, even though we didn't want to be. All we want to do is have an online business. And we found ourselves that we have to have great photography, great writing, and then we have to be great at publishing it and publicizing it through the social web. Now we're in the development and the maturity of semantic search. It's turning us all into psychologists. We have to understand what the person who comes really wants to achieve. We have to understand their needs and put that ahead of our needs. Now, funnily enough, although this sounds ridiculous almost, you think, I didn't go in an online business to become a psychologist. In the offline world, we are hardwired to actually behave like this because we have prosocial wiring in our brain. So if you come into my shop, sure, I want to make a sale, but at the same time, I want to help you as a human being. So if you say, hey, you're selling hammers, and I say yes, and I need this particular hammer, and I don't have it. Now there's two options there. I'll ask you what you need it for, and do I have something that will do the job for you? And if you don't have that, I'll say, hey, okay, what you need to do is go to Freddie down the road. And then that's it, I solved it for you. What have I done in that situation? I've created a relationship between me and you, and I satisfied a particular need. I did it as a human, right, as a person, but psychologically we created that connection. Next time that you want something, you know that Freddie has things, but also you'll come to me because the connection is there. So that's how we operate in the real world. This is unconscious because we are hardwired like that. We get in the digital domain, we are there by intent. Nothing is hardwired. We need to think about everything we do. And usually because of the pressures that are applied to us, we think of ourselves, right? Because we try to achieve what we want to achieve. We want to have a successful business, a popular website. We want our content to be everywhere. We want people to come to a website to convert. And we try too hard by focusing on that. And if we step outside that and think about our visitors, suddenly we will see a different perspective, a different kind of approach. And that's when the content creation element of what we actually put in there comes into its own, because it has to reflect what they need to do. And that's where we get into perspective, expectations, and certainly intent. And all these things guide the behavior of our visitors.
Yes. Okay. So I will get back again to Google, but do you see a significant improvement of the intent classification? Because this is one of the goals of Google. And actually, how do you see this improvement when it comes to the classification according to the intent of the documents on Google? Do you see a very big improvements? Because we can confirm here for Bulgaria that there is a very big improvement, and many of the things already changed when it comes to the relevancy and the accuracy of the document we see ranked by phrases. But what is your opinion? How do you see these things?
Yes, I mean, what you just said is exactly spot on. Essentially, one of the primary drives that develop semantic search at the moment is mapping intent at a superficial level through what they call semantic markers, and then at the deeper level, which marks semantic intent. And I'll give you an example here. Suppose, if we go back to a previous example, we go from a page, and then we get to the final page, and it's abandonment. And you say, okay, we go through the options why this is a superficial semantic marker. Why did a person abandon that? And then from there, we go to a deeper one, which is our interpretation that either, it was wrong, the price was wrong, etc. However, depending on the journey that they have taken to get there, the semantic marker becomes lighter or heavier. So if somebody, for example, takes 2 leaps to get there and leaves, and somebody takes 10 leaps and stays on each page and absorbs information and then leaves, that means something different. So semantic indexing or semantic mapping really is quite something that is constantly going to develop, and it'll give us better and better understanding of online behavior and also better and better understanding of human behavior. But this at the same time places the burden on the website owner to create the right kind of content. In the past, what did we need? We needed a homepage, products, checkout. Now we need to have all the different elements that will bring us here. We need to have perhaps content that explains why this product is different. We need to have content that explains why this website is different. We need to have content that explains the approach. And we need to have content that explains what happens afterwards, after you make the purchase, because that goes into the creation of trust. So suddenly it becomes really complicated. You say, I needed 3 pages in the past, and now maybe I need 13. But that is the complexity of human behavior. At the same time, you have more people than ever shopping online. So potentially, if you do this right, you're going to gain a lot more people.
Yes, absolutely.
David almost answered my next question about preparing content properly to answering user's intents.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean this is I mean we say prepare your content properly. Now, if you ask a traditional SEO that question, what are they going to tell you? They're going to tell you, well, make sure you have clearly defined sentences, clearly defined keywords, make sure the thematic, the theme linking is right, make sure the central idea is in the writing, make sure your picture, these are all technical things, right? This is from us, our perspective. We know these things. And
So don't wait.
yes, and they should be exactly, and they should be happening as a matter of course. We shouldn't be arguing about this. We should absolutely need them. If I had a website and I couldn't do those things, then I have to say, right, I need somebody to do them for me. And I'll go straight away and say, guys, this is what I need. I can't do it to the detail required, so please do it for me. But then we come to the other thing, which is what should be on that page? Sure, but what is it going to be? Is it going to be something that tells us that this is the best company ever selling the best possible product at the best possible price? Well, if it comes from me, it has zero value, right? It's my business. What am I going to say? That,
Everyone
hey guys,
is saying that they are the best.
Yeah, absolutely. What do we say? We're the best of the best of the best of the best, and has zero value because that's from us. But if I see it from your perspective, if it's expensive, this is what I have to explain to you why it's expensive. I'll say, hey, you know what? This is expensive. Seriously, I can see that. But this is what you get for your money so that you can make the best possible choice. So if you don't want to go for this because it's too expensive, here are 3 alternatives. I've got 2 of them, and one of my competitors has the 3rd. You make a choice. I may potentially lose a sale through this approach. What have I won? I've won somebody's trust.
Yeah. And as you said many years ago, and connection and emotion and trust. Again, trust.
Yes, exactly. And you never know how far that trust goes. They may actually then promote your company to somebody else because they know that audience or that person or that group or that community can afford your prices, can afford your approach. So these are the things which we now need, again, to start strategizing for on the web. In real life, we do this, again, automatically, right? But there's nothing automatic in the web. We have to be intentional. In order to be intentional, we need to understand other people's minds, and then we also need to understand our own mind. And this is where all the difficulties come in.
Or in other words, I would also add that for our audience and for the discussion that it is important not just to try to sell something. I will always say, and I always say to when it comes to the projects and to the people in the SEO industry, try to educate.
Yes.
Be valuable. Be valuable. Just writing an article about your product and saying that it is great and it is expensive, as you said, this is not valuable to anybody. And I will even say nobody, because this is just an article, like a PR article, actually. It doesn't help anybody, for sure. But what about if we start writing about the purposes of the product? How to use it? Why to use it? Where? By who? Different types of personas available to use this product. Then we change the things really, really, really much.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because essentially that is exactly the approach that professionals bring in. Okay, because what happens, you go to a professional company, they ask you the questions which you haven't asked yourself in order for them to get a clear picture, and then they take you outside yourself, and you end up looking in from the outside, and you get a different picture. This is invaluable stuff. Normally, if you do something yourself, if you're optimizing your own website, most of the time you're sort of inside your head, and you're looking out, and that's all you can see, because you're inside your head and you know how you feel. So we always need that kind of counterbalance, which is so hard to get usually. And those questions which you just said, you're asking why, who, when, and where, all those things, which seem very basic. When we create content which we create for ourselves, we tend to overlook them completely.
Yeah.
We also We already have some questions for our audience.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give you one question, David.
Okay.
Could you please share more about how do you capture intent of visitors and how do you personalize the interaction according to the intent?
Excellent. Okay, this is an excellent question. I was hoping to put the answer towards the end of this, but let's discuss it now. Basically, the fundamental solution to this already exists in the real world. We are hardwired for it and we apply it automatically. And it's empathy. Most people tend to say trust, but trust is my willingness to do business with you if I have never done business with you before. That's what trust is at the end of the day. But how does that trust come about? It comes about through empathy. And empathy, everybody thinks it's a woolly sort of hippie emotion. It's not. It's a technique which the brain uses in order to understand the motivation of somebody else and decide whether they need to trust them or not. So it's a calculation, right? So when we apply empathy, empathy has two components. One is cognitive, which means it is hard logic, which we ask, why are you here? You want to buy a car. What kind of car do you want to used or new? You know, we're going to direct you through our decision tree. But the other one is emotional. So essentially, the second component is emotion. And then we have to ask, you know, if you're buying a car, how do you feel? Okay, you're going to feel excitement because you're buying a new car. At the same time, you want to feel trust in the sense that the car which you're going to buy is not going to break down on day 3. And if it breaks down on day 3, if that happens, you're going to be covered. Think how Amazon, the most faceless organization, has worked really hard to create that kind of trust in its services by offering in the beginning, and even now to some extent, a blanket returns policy. So suddenly your anxiety at buying from Amazon goes away because you're thinking, if it's wrong, if it's the wrong thing, if it doesn't arrive, if it's broken, it's covered. So I'm going to take that risk because it's frictionless. So to answer the specific question, how do you go about understanding intent? How do you go about understanding empathy? Sorry, understanding how people think and act and how you can personalize it. Well, you have to apply empathy, and then you have to think, what would it take? What would you need in order to satisfy that emotional appeal? So if we go to the example of my car, of buying a car, if it's a new car and you're talking about emotion, you're going to also put in content which addresses that emotion. People are excited about buying a new car. They're also worried about the finances and they need to settle that. They're also worried about the after sales service and you need to settle that. You need to personalize in terms of perhaps where they live. So if somebody buys a car from you and they're like 5 miles away, you say, hey, you know, we'll actually deliver it to you. Or if it's somebody who's 15, 20 miles away, or somebody who lives in another country, you know, they're going to have different things. So you need to be able to sort of visualize what is your core target audience and address that. And then as you create more and more content with the sort of roll of time, expand on the layers that you'll see from there.
Very good and rich answer. Thank you, David. Okay.
A very good explanation, actually. I have one additional question.
Mm-hmm.
What about the mixed content? We still see this kind of mixed intent, actually. Sorry for this phrase. What about the mixed intent? We still see for some phrases, we all know about the query classifications around the intent and so on. But what about this mixed intent behind the results? Because, for example, we all know that Google is ranking the signals, ranking the documents based on signals.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, and of course, according to the behavior of the user and what they really like to see, and so on, based on many tests. So, what about this mixed intent when we have, for example, if you write an informational intent phrase, and we get, for example, 5 or 6 results coming from blog posts or research centers of websites. But at the same time, this phrase also triggers some, let's say, FAQ pages, or maybe they could be category pages of e-commerce web stores and so on. What do you think about this kind of mixed intent, and how do you think we can strategize our content to match it? Why, for example, what I mean, should we be in the blocks or in categories of the e-commerce stores, or this is just an example, of course.
This is an absolutely fundamental question which you have asked. It troubles a lot of content creators at a personal level. It troubles a lot of companies who create content. You are right that mixed intent can arise quite easily. It will arise quite easily for many very specific reasons, and I'm going to give a couple of these. The first one is that still, despite the complexity and the advancements in our search technology, our ability to mine intent is at its infancy. It is very imprecise. We're using behavior, which is exhibited through the web. We track that behavior without really understanding the thinking of the person behind it. And then we try to sort of project, to make some kind of inference and some kind of judgment. The second thing is that our audience through technology has grown immensely. Okay, so we're not talking to a single culture anymore. We're not talking to a single people anymore. You can have a website in Nigeria, and you can talk to the whole world. You can have a website in England. You can talk to people in Bulgaria. And you think, how am I going to understand all that? And the key here, and this is the difficult bit, is context. Because context crystallizes the intent at the point of consumption. So without context, the intent can be fairly broad. You can say, I want to do that thing, or I can do that thing, because the behavior is going to be going along general lines. But if we can sort of fix the context, then that begins to give us very precise answers. And I'm going to give a very simple example, right? If I look for a pizzeria or a pizza at maybe 10 a.m. It's usually highly unlikely that I'm looking for a pizzeria to go and eat at 10 a.m. I mean, it can happen, but depending on the context of my situation, also depending on my personal search history, etc., I'm more likely to get pizza recipes, general things about pizza restaurants, etc. But if I do that at 12 p.m., then I'm going to get a pizzeria next to me and say, hey, this is where you order pizza, right? And order takeout. Now, this is a kind of understanding. This is a kind of situation where the context of the situation helps crystallize the result by better understanding intent. And the very fact that what I just said doesn't happen automatically every time shows the problem, right? So from a content creation's point of view, or content creators' point of view, what must we do? We must try to understand the context of our different readers. And this is how it works, right? If we take the data is data, it's just information that comes everywhere. What we do with the data, the way we behave, that's culture. Okay, so the same data leads to different behavior in, let's say, Italy, that's the culture of Italy, to a different behavior in England, it's a culture of England. And then context changes how that behavior and how that data is perceived. So we want that crystallization of context. And that's the magic bullet. That's understanding what does your customer want to do at that particular moment. It requires a little bit of imagination, certainly. It requires a lot of experience. It requires a tremendous amount of empathy. So we need to understand, somebody coming from England to a website in Italy is probably different to somebody coming from Milan to the same website. Okay, so we need to be able to understand that.
Yeah, don't you think that by using these new and latest technologies, we will get the chance to decide where we want to be? Like, for example, if we would like to serve the user with educational content, if we would like to serve the user with a category, for example, or any other type of content.
Well, here's the easy answer to this one. In a world where we have no restrictions on the sharing of information, where data flow is easily captured, easily apportioned, where all the devices are always on, always readable, then we would begin to edge closer and closer to the magic golden triangle of user intent, content creation, and search engine results. We don't live in that world. A lot of people have devices which don't give their location. And a classic example, my laptop doesn't give my location away because I do a lot of search search experiments, and I don't want Google to know where I am for that specific reason. But my phone does. So the results I get on my phone when I do the same search query are totally different to the results I get on my laptop. So we're going to get to this fragmentation of information more and more. And this is only going to become worse as the information gets denser and denser and people's behaviors also begin to become more and more complicated. There's certainly a certain amount of distrust where online services are concerned. That is probably only going to grow. There's a certain amount of nuanced behavior, people using VPNs, people using very little information on their profile so that can be drawn from. There's also going to be an increased fragmentation of search. Okay, we use Google, but also use Google Maps. We use Waze. We use YouTube. We use all the different Google services, and they're sort of search engines in their own right. And that's we're going to see more and more of that happening. Because of that, it's going to become very difficult to sort of give instant results. The pressure is always going to be on the content creator to work really hard to bridge that gap. So the more information you have out there, the more data you have, the more clarity you have, the more context-driven is the data you put online, the better it is for the results that you're going to get.
Thank you, David.
Yeah,
we have... Yeah, Dido?
Yeah,
we have...
so, and another thing, why some people think that there are some tools helping us to measure and maybe calculate the intent. Can you recommend some tools? Actually, I'm very keen on manual work when it comes to the intent.
Yes.
Because yes, I don't want to sound offensive to some of the software engineers and tools we have on the market. Some of them are really good when they try to determine. I will use the word try actually because it is not always accurate to determine the intent. But can I recommend some tools as a preference?
I don't. And the reason for this is because I'm 100% behind you. I think at this point in our technological advancement, we can't use automated tools to accurately mine intent. All we can have is generalizations. Why? Because in order to create a tool that will do that, what do we need to do? We need somebody to create an algorithm that takes a generic kind of behavior, applies it within some kind of subjective norm, and says, the likelihood of this is this. Sure, if you're new to all this, by all means, this will help. But if you're an experienced SEO, if you're even an experienced businessman who knows your business, then you understand better the effect that the content that you create has on the person that consumes it. So at the moment, there's simply no replacement for that because the semantic density of that content now is quite intense. Okay, and what I mean by that, in the past, if we needed a page to rank for, let's say, best used car sales site in the world, what did we need to do? We needed on the URL, best used car sales site in the web. We needed H1, we needed some keywords, we needed some invisible text in the background giving us best car, and that would come up, right? And that was very light, very superficial. And now we need signals from the social web. We need signals from people's search behavior who search for particular terms which reflect upon used cars without even being very specific. We need to have technical information. We need to have links from sort of trusted websites that deal with this kind of thing. We need perhaps to have reviews on Google Maps, reviews on Google itself. We need to have perhaps magazines talking about the website and how cool it is in terms of used cars. And then it begins to surface for that term. So it's become really, really complex in terms of how we define that trustworthiness. And that can only come now from the kind of density which a true business owner would put in there, because they understand it best and they begin to sort of put their soul into it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Bobby, go ahead.
Yeah, I have another question, David.
Okay.
What kind of problems wrong intent can cause website or business owner?
I have two classic examples for this, and they come both from the pandemic, right? The pandemic affected us all, right? And because it affected us all, it caused the classic problem, which is becoming more and more widespread, of context collapse. So suddenly, within that context, it was all of us. You couldn't use context to single out anybody because we're all affected equally by it. Okay, in Italy, there was that instance which was televised across the world where people were locked down in their flats and somebody came out and played some musical instrument and they sung together. And that went viral. Most people saw it and thought, this is heartwarming and human. Taking that example, Gal Gadot, who plays Wonder Woman, and her pals went on Twitter, I think, and they sort of sung together trying to recreate that moment. And it backfired. And you think, why did it backfire? I mean, the intent of Gal Gadot was genuine. She wanted to participate with her pals and sing, the same sort of song. But from the Italian people who were locked behind, in their flats, and they came out to their balconies and they sang this song together, it brought us together. It was very human. It was great. For Gal Gadot and her pals, was simply seen as another ploy to remain relevant when they couldn't be because everybody was locked down, right? So it backfired. Same thing with Madonna. Madonna came out and she's locked in her house. She posted this video on Instagram of her in the bathtub in some sort of milky sort of fluid. And she's, saying that we're all together in our houses. We're all suffering from the pandemic. Again, her intent was real. She's feeling the same lockdown pain, lockdown isolation that everybody else was feeling, except she's in a sort of multi-million-dollar mansion having a milky bath when the rest of us are thinking, well, when is this going to end so we can come out and meet our friends? So that again backfired. And this creates that issue of wrong intent. Although their intent was genuine from themselves, because of the difference in context, because they didn't exhibit enough empathy to see how this would be perceived, then it backfired and it gave them the wrong kind of results. And that shows the problems, I suspect, or I suggest, or the trouble of getting your intent right. You have to understand context. You have to understand other people through real empathy, not just what you're feeling and not just what you want to show, but also how that will be perceived, because then you have to take their feelings into account. So, these two classic examples show just how difficult it is sometimes to get it right, but we constantly need to struggle for that. We constantly need to be aware. How is the context changing? How is the breaking down of cultural barriers changing the message that I'm sending out? Because it will be perceived differently. So if I say something and it's great for the Italian market, it may not be for the German market. It may not be for the British market. So I need to think, what is it I'm missing here? What human element I'm not taking into account?
You mean that we have to know our audience well,
yes.
Their psychology and intent and needs, all they want to satisfy them with our services, products, and etc.
Yes, it's become that difficult now, right? We really have to be psychologists, and it wasn't enough that we had to be professional photographers, professional writers, professional storytellers, and even programmers, right? When we just want to just have a business online and make a living, now we also have to be psychologists. So yes, unfortunately, that's the world we're in.
Okay, David, let me to ask you one interesting question.
Okay.
Maybe for our audience and maybe for you.
Okay.
What about phrases without intent? We still see some of them.
Well, here's the thing. In order for somebody to put anything there in the web, anything at all, right, there has to be some kind of intent behind it. So there's no such thing as a phrase without intent. There may be a phrase which is perhaps not targeted, maybe a phrase which you haven't catered for, but somebody has that intent if they use that phrase to search for something.
Phrases without enough signals to be classified. So that classified.
Yes.
And we see very much mixed results within that, let's say, top 20 results.
Yes. Okay. That's always okay. That is, and even Google gets a thing about, is it 10% at the moment of search queries have never been encountered before? Yeah, 15%. I mean, they continue to bring it down, but it continues to be a bugbear. You have to think, when that happens, when you get a search query that has never been encountered before, when you get a phrase that you haven't thought of, what has gone wrong? And this is what has gone wrong. There's a context which we have failed to understand. Because that context gives rise to a need, and that need we haven't perceived. So how do we deal with that? Well, there are two options. The simplest option is to say, okay, if it's only 10% of my business, and if that 10% represents, I don't know, maybe 50 clicks, I can discount it because the effort of getting it is too much. But if we talk about volume, and maybe that 10-15% is maybe 10,000 clicks, then it's actually worth getting. And then at that stage, you begin to say, okay, because you're bigger, right? You're bigger now. So you say, okay, what am I missing? What is the human element which I'm not seeing? And then how can I address that? And you know that in your efforts, you're going to be imperfect. But if you keep on trying, you begin to narrow down those phrases which you haven't been able to cater for. And again, this is where, if you do SEO, professional teams are worth their weight in salt, really, because they bring in a multiplicity of talents, a multiplicity of perspectives. They bring in professionals who can actually help you do that. On your own, it's really, really difficult.
We're going to the fun part of our webinar, but before that, I will ask another interesting question from the audience.
Okay.
David, they ask, we know that there are three kinds of intent: transactional, informational, and navigational, right?
Yes.
But from a business owner point of view, in their essence, are they all just commercial intents, in fact, or
yes,
not?
All three are like that. I mean, think of the way we buy something. Before we buy anything these days, right? What do? We go online and check out reviews. We check out potential problems. We check out issues that may arise. So this is essentially an informational kind of intent, but that will lead to something else. So we need to understand that essentially everything which we look for is going to lead to some kind of transactional outcome in the end. If you're in the business of selling, information is your weapon. You need to educate your audience and reach their world, and then they will come in and actually buy something from you. If you're in your business of just selling information, so you can have perhaps audience which you can consume your adverts, or you can have audience which can perhaps buy a subscription or something, like if you're a newspaper, then your information has to be the kind of thing that enriches the internal world of the person that actually consumes it. Now, think for ourselves, right? When you read an article, if that article tells us exactly what we know or what we suspect we know, what happens? Nothing. We don't even remember it. If the article allows us to understand something better about ourselves or about the world, we think, whoa, this is amazing. We share it with all our friends, right? Because we're excited by it. That's a very human response. That's a very psychological response. Somebody has put enough thought in there to think, somebody coming to the page, what are they going to learn which they didn't know? And they give it to me. And then I'm really excited by that. So that's the kind of thinking that we need to actually put into our content creation now.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen.
Okay.
So to show the
Actually, yes, we have a fun part at our webinars. It's a common thing, and we share it with all of our guests. It's a very interesting thing because we share an image and we ask for all text ideas. Even you, including you, David. So this is the photo.
Yeah. Now let me explain. Now we are waiting for ideas for alternative tag to this picture with David. All funny and interesting ideas are welcome. I can propose David and the Tigers.
That sounds like a really good one.
Yeah.
I would say David the cat lover.
Do you love cats, David?
I love cats. I actually love all animals. I think they, apart from the fact that they make us feel good about ourselves because we actually connect with them at a very sort of emotional level. At a very cognitive level, what do we see? We see an intelligence which is different from us, making an effort to bridge the gap with us, because they all try to communicate with us, and we try obviously to communicate with them. And I really find that fascinating. I I now have a dog, and I've had him for 4 years, and I raised him from a little puppy, and it's been a fascinating journey because it's my first dog as an adult. I had dogs when I was a kid, but as an adult, and I've been following the way he sort of sees the world, how he determines what is trustworthy, what is not, how he gets excited, and you can see an intelligence acting through his eyes, and it's just marvelous.
Yeah, people say that dogs and cats are different universes.
Well, they're absolutely are. Although they have a lot of overlap, I think the best distinction of their difference lies in English law. Now, in English law, cats are still a wild animal. So if a dog bites your neighbor, you're responsible. But if your cat goes and scratches the neighbor's brand new car, the cat is responsible, right?
Yeah.
Not you. So you're not responsible for that.
Okay, now we have some buffing ideas.
Okay.
Which is okay. And because we are going to the end of the webinar, let's ask David for some final words about these such important topics like intent and context, because as we see, there is no tools. All depends on our minds to find and understand intent personally and work on it to bring real results.
Actually, David, can you summarize some tips, and let's say in a minute, for our audience?
Definitely. Okay, and thank you very much for that. I think that's brilliant. Okay, if we want to benefit, let's say, let's forget everything we covered over the last 30 or 40 minutes, right? Let's forget everything at all and say somebody asks, what should I do to benefit from the semantic web as it is now, so that search actually finds my site? This is what you need. You need semantic density. Get as much information about you and your business as possible in the content that you create and on your website. Get it on the social media profiles. Explain who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, what is it that you're doing, and what makes you special. You need to explain that in as much detail as possible. Then have clarity in your approach. And clarity comes from having a very clear-cut identity. Sure enough, if you're having a commercial website, we'll have the same things, right? What do we need? We need to make money because this is how we make a living. This is not different if you're a person owning a small website than if you're Nike owning a global multi-million-dollar business. But this is not what a business is, right? I mean, this is what a business does at its core. But a business is a set of beliefs, a set of values, and a set of principles. This is clarity. This is part of your identity. How do you get that across? How do people understand it the way you understand it internally? If you can't answer this through your content, then it's not answered. Then it's not clear. Then your branding is wrong. Then your search marketing is wrong. Then your marketing messaging is wrong. Then your social media profiles are going to have the wrong kind of impact. So these are the things you need to ask yourself. And this is what you need to achieve. So clarity is important. Semantic density is important. A clear sense of identity is important. And a clear sense of purpose is important. You need to have a purpose in this world other than I need to make some money to make a living, because we all need that, right? Without exception. But what is your purpose? For me, I get excited by the fact that I actually explain complex things in a simple way as possible, and people actually find them helpful. And for me, that really fulfills me. It really fires me up. For other people, if you're selling a car, seeing a smile on somebody who bought a car from you, it must be amazing, right? Because you changed their life. You made them feel better. So that's the magic. Work out your purpose.
Just to add something that David will give us some articles about intent that are really useful. So if someone is interested in this topic, he can read it later and to take more time over this area.
Okay, that's brilliant. Yeah, because they actually have a lot of depth in them, those 3 articles, and they go into studies and so there a lot of the things which are covered now, they're sort of covered in those 3 different pieces in detail.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for being with us today, and really big thanks to David Emmerwan for this amazing knowledge on one of the most trendy topics today, the intent, the context. I would like to say thank you to our team for their great work, to our sponsors, Fairfact, for this webinar. We will be expecting you next Friday with our next guest here from Bulgaria, Dimitar Georgiev Biko. Meanwhile, don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Facebook, where you can find a lot of useful knowledge and information. Don't forget to follow the links provided by David, because he really knows his stuff. Thank you so much again, David, for being with us and for sharing all of my amazing knowledge and tips.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.